In any normal state, the body that poses a threat to the government and draws power from it is usually the army, if it doesn't reach the point of a military uprising. But it uses the power it gets from the government to realize a certain military or security economic policy. The High Court of Justice only detracts power. It can determine policy. We heard about the fence. We can say that the High Court of Justice has vicarious responsibility for what happened on October 7th. The fence there was a perimeter fence, and the IDF fired at anyone who approached the area or crossed the fence. The High Court of Justice didn't rule on the matter. There were a number of petitions, but the hearings were held in the High Court of Justice on behalf of various left-wing movements, and they managed to get the army to change its position. And we saw that in the attacks on the fence that preceded October 7th, the IDF used something ridiculous that is known as riot control, as if this is some kind of demonstration in Tel Aviv. I would just like to clarify this point, because if we don't want them to normalize everything, we have to make sure we use the precise terms. So a demonstration is an action that citizens take in a certain state against their own government. But when hundreds of Arabs are crossing the border and they are rioting, that is an enemy at the gates. That is not a demonstration. They're not demonstrating against their own government. The left-wing organizations didn't like the way that the IDF in 2018, starting from the eve of Passover, dealt with riots exactly of this kind at the fence, the purpose of which was to break through and reach the communities. They used a heavy hand, and they managed to stop them. They killed dozens of so-called demonstrators. And since then, there were escalations over months, if you recall, that culminated with incendiary balloons and fires. The left worked very hard to neutralize the IDF's response. One of the results was the killing of Barel Khadria about 2 years ago at the fence. Ultimately, they received indirect response from the High Court of Justice, even though, to the best of my knowledge, there wasn't an actual ruling of how the IDF should act. But the very fact that the High Court of Justice agreed to hear this petition from an extreme left-wing fringe organization to discuss the rules of engagement based on an editorial in Haaretz, this already posed a threat to the IDF. And especially since new commanders were just taking over at that time, like Herzl Levy, followed by Finkelman and Toledano. And Herzl Levy was a controversial appointment made by a transition government by an alternative prime minister. And in principle, the High Court of Justice should not have allowed it.